So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on wherever in the world you are joining us from. As indicated by Barry, my name is Rommell Hippolyte, and my job today is to set the stage for our presenters in this section of the program, who will be discussing consumer protection enforcement. So in other words, I'll be presenting the appetizer before diving into the meat of the issue, which is enforcement issues. So I think that it is necessary that, before we speak about those hardcore issues, that we talk a little bit about consumer detriment. So in terms of the layout of my presentation, we're first going to define consumer detriment. Then we're going to talk about why consumer detriment is important. We're going to briefly, if we have time, talk about how to conduct a consumer detriment study. And then I'll give a couple examples of recent detriment studies that have been conducted. So what is consumer detriment? And you can see here from the definition, consumer detriment refers to the harm or disadvantage experienced by customers as a result of unfair or deceptive practices, inadequate product quality, poor service, or other negative aspects of the marketplace. So it can arise when consumers are treated unfairly, misled, or suffer financial losses due to the actions of businesses or service providers. So consumer detriment can take various forms, including financial losses. So consumers may experience monetary harm through deceptive pricing, unfair contract terms, or fraudulent activities. Unsafe products, consumers may face physical harm or health risks due to defective or unsafe products. Poor quality or performance, consumers may suffer from products or services that fail to meet their expected standards, including durability, reliability, or performance. Misleading or deceptive practices, and you can see the picture here of what is advertised and what really you get when you might go into a particular restaurant. So consumers might be misled by false advertising, deceptive marketing, or inaccurate product claims, leading to uninformed purchasing decisions. You can also experience detriment through unfair treatment, where consumers may encounter unfair practices, such as discriminatory behavior, hidden charges, or abusive customer service. And you can have you can experience detriment through lack of information or transparency, where consumers may be disadvantaged by a lack of clear and transparent information, making it difficult to compare products, understand terms and conditions, or make well-informed choices. So now that we know what consumer detriment is, it is a relevant question to ask is, why is understanding consumer detriment important? So understanding consumer detriment is crucial for consumer policy development and consumer protection enforcement for several reasons. First, effective policy development. A thorough understanding of consumer detriment allows policymakers to identify areas of concern and prioritize policy initiatives accordingly. By understanding the specific types and extent of harm consumers face, policymakers can design targeted measures to address these issues and protect consumer interests. Evidence-based decision-making. Consumer detriment studies provide empirical evidence and data that can inform policy decisions. They help policymakers assess the impact of existing regulation, identify gaps in consumer protection frameworks, and develop evidence-based solutions to address consumer harm effectively. Proactive risk mitigation. By understanding consumer detriment, policymakers and regulatory authorities can proactively identify and address potential risks before they escalate. This includes anticipating emerging issues, monitoring industry practices, and implementing preventative measures to protect consumers from harm. Strengthening consumer rights. Understanding consumer detriment helps identify areas where consumer rights are being violated or compromised. This knowledge informs the development of legislation, regulations, and enforcement mechanisms that enhance consumer rights, improve market fairness, and promote consumer trust and confidence. Consumer detriment can also help with targeted enforcement and compliance. Consumer detriment studies can assist enforcement agencies in targeting their resources effectively by identifying sectors, industries, or specific practices associated with significant consumer harm. The evaluation of effectiveness. Consumer detriment studies provide a baseline for evaluating the effectiveness of consumer protection measures. So by periodically assessing the impact of policies and regulations, policymakers can make necessary adjustments, strengthen enforcement mechanisms, and ensure that consumer protection measures remain relevant and effective over time. So how do we assess detriment? Well, consumer detriment studies aim to quantify and understand the extent of harm experienced by consumers in various sectors, industries, or countries, and B, identify ways where consumer protection measures and regulatory interventions may be needed to address the identified issues and protect consumers from harm. So in terms of a methodology, these are the particular methodological steps that are taken in conducting a consumer detriment study. So you might start clearly defining the research objectives, which might include identifying the types and extent of consumer harm, understanding the underlying causes, assessing the financial impact on consumers, or evaluating the effectiveness of consumer protection measures. You might want to design a study framework where researchers need to develop a framework that outlines the scope of the study, which industries you're going to target, how you're going to collect data, which analytical approach that you're going to take. The next step might be data collection. So you might want to look at if you're going to collect data from primary or secondary sources. In most cases, a lot of countries or a lot of studies would have used surveys where they would ask consumers about the particular example of a loss or losses that they would have experienced within a given year. As well as some studies would look at how consumers seek to overcome that particular detriment, what kind of solutions that they would have sought. So for instance, some studies might contain aspects where they might ask about if they are well informed about the Consumer Protection Agency, if they've used that as a particular avenue to try to overcome the detriment or get back any money or any financial loss that they would have taken. With all the information that you've collected, then there's the issue of estimating detriment. So with the data analysis, you would then try to estimate the value or magnitude of consumer detriment that has taken place. And of course, when all of that is finished, you would probably look to identify any key findings and recommendations and trends and patterns relating to stakeholders and how they address the identified issues, how much money they would have lost, how you can then improve the consumer protection framework and mitigate harm. So these are a couple of examples that have pulled out on consumer detriment studies, examples of consumer detriment studies. So you would see here, like for instance, in 2015 in the UK, this was done by the CMA, the Markets Authority in the UK. They would have done a detriment study on a wide range of sectors, including energy, banking, retail, and communications, and they estimated the detriment to be around 4.1 billion pounds. And some of the specific important issues that they would have identified would be like poor customer service, lack of transparency, and unfair pricing practices. There was also one done in 2016 in Australia that was a little bit more focused on the financial system, and they estimated that detriment was around 1.6 billion Australian dollars. And some of the issues that they would have uncovered would have been high fees, inappropriate advice, and complex products. In 2007, the EU looked specifically again at personal current accounts, and they estimated detriment around 770 billion euros, and they identified complex pricing structures, lack of transparency, and difficulty switching between banks as pretty important issues that consumers would have faced. In the United States, there was another detriment study that specifically looked at the mobile industry, and they would have estimated detriment at $766 million, and they found misleading advertising, unfair contract terms, and inadequate customer service as major issues that were faced by consumers. And lastly, in 2019, you can see here that in Canada, they also did one that was really focused on looking at estimating the value caused by fraud and deceptive market practices. So they looked at telecoms, retail and financial services, and online scams, and they indicated that, and they estimated, sorry, that detriment was around 766 million Canadian dollars. So these are examples of studies that have been done on detriment. As you can see, that by estimating or coming up with an estimate of estimated value of detriment, it also kind of provides a platform for where you can advocate for the need for consumer protection framework or robust consumer protection framework in your jurisdiction. So at this time, I would encourage everyone to check out the Commission's website and social media platforms for some of the work we have done over the past couple of years regarding consumer protection, including our report on food prices during the pandemic and our study on air passenger rights, which focus on consumer protection framework in the region for involuntary cancellations of flights by airlines. So I wish to thank you at this point. And Barry, I will now turn the mic over to you so that you can introduce our first speaker in relation to this particular segment. Thank you.